Ever think about, like, I don't know, one part of the government, like, actually suing another part over taxes? It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, that seems.
But that's what this Philippine Supreme Court case is all about. LRTA versus Quezon City. This one is wild.
It really makes you think about how, like, government works,
Yeah.
and what cities can actually, do when it comes to taxes and stuff.
Yeah, you'd think a city couldn't just, I don't know, demand taxes from a national transportation system.
Right.
But let's back up a little. For anyone listening who doesn't know, what was the situation here?
Okay, so we're talking about the Light Rail Transit Authority, the LRTA. They run those light rail lines you see going through Manila. And Quezon City decided to hit them with this huge property tax bill for all those stations and buildings and all the land along the train lines.
Yeah, and the LRTA was basically like, hold on, we're not just some company. We're a government instrumentality, like part of the republic.
Yeah.
They were saying they shouldn't have to pay local taxes.
They were basically saying, you can't tax us, we are the government.
Right. But Quezon City was like, nah, you're GOCC, a government-owned and controlled corporation.
Right.
You're running things like a business. You're charging fares. So you got to pay up like everybody else.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Quezon City wasn't playing around. They actually went and auctioned off some LRTA properties to try to get that unpaid tax money. We're not talking about like some storage sheds or something. This was prime real estate right there along those busy train lines.
That's pretty bold, right? Like auctioning off a government agency's property.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And it gets even more complicated because this wasn't even the first time this happened to the LRTA. There was this case back in 2000 where they actually lost a similar fight against the city of Manila.
Oh, wow.
So Quezon City was probably thinking, well, we got this legally.
So with that precedent in mind,
Yeah.
the LRTA took Quezon City to court.
Uh-huh.
What happened then?
Well, the lower court actually sided with Quezon City. They pointed to that earlier case as, justification. It really looked like the LRTA was going to have to pay up.
So that was it. Case closed. The city wins.
Not so fast. This is where the Supreme Court comes in, and they really shook things up.
Wait, are you saying they overturned the lower court?
They did. The Supreme Court in 2019, case number GR No 224366, completely reversed that decision and said the LRTA was right. And their reasoning gets to the heart of, how we define different parts of the government.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more. How did the Supreme Court justify that? Seems like a big reversal.
Well, they really got into the legal nitty-gritty of what's a GOCC versus a government instrumentality. It gets kind of complicated.
I bet. Can you unpack that for us? What's the difference and why does it matter here?
Oh, it's a huge difference. A GOCC, a government-owned and controlled corporation, usually has more independence. They're kind of more like businesses, focused on making money, even if their goal is, public service in the end.
Okay, so that's a GOCC. What about this government instrumentality thing?
A government instrumentality is more like a direct extension of the republic itself. It's a core part of what the government does, and it's not about making profits.
Gotcha. So the Supreme Court was saying that even though the LRTA looks like a business on the surface, they weren't really acting like one in the true sense.
Exactly. And to support their point, they pointed to this other big case, the Manila International Airport Authority case, the MIA. That case showed that even if something has corporate powers, it can still be considered a government instrumentality if its main job is to serve the public.
Ah, so they're using that case as like precedent to back up the LRTA's argument.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court didn't stop there. They actually looked at the LRTA's finances and were like, hey, you guys are barely breaking even. You're not exactly swimming in cash.
So their point was that the LRTA wasn't operating like a money-making machine, which makes them more of a government instrumentality, not a GOCC.
Exactly. The Supreme Court saw past the business-like stuff and focused on how the LRTA is essential, how they provide this crucial service.
This is getting juicy. I bet our listeners are starting to see how this case could have implications for way more than just the LRTA, maybe for all kinds of government services. But we're going to dive into all of that right after this. So we know that the Supreme Court said there's a big difference between GOCCs and government instrumentalities, and they sided with the LRTA, saying they didn't have to pay those local taxes. But this has got to have, like, bigger consequences, right?
Oh, definitely. This wasn't just like a win for the LRTA. This set a precedent, It could change how other government services get funded, how they work, all of that.
Right. Like, just imagine if cities and towns could just tax whatever government entity they wanted. It could really mess things up for those essential services everyone needs.
Total chaos, right? Imagine local governments going after, I don't know, the Department of Education or like the Department of Health, trying to tax them. They wouldn't be able to function.
Yeah, it'd be this constant battle between the national government and the local governments, everyone fighting over money.
Exactly. And that's why the Supreme Court focusing on the LRTA's public service role is so important. They were basically saying that some government functions are just too crucial to be messed with by, local tax squabbles.
It's like they were laying down the law, saying, these services are vital, we can't risk them being disrupted.
It's a really interesting legal philosophical debate, you know? Where does a city's power stop? When does the national interest become more important? This LRTA case really makes us think about that.
Right, and it's not just some abstract idea. This has real consequences for real people. Think about all those commuters who rely on the LRT to get to work, to school, to appointments, everywhere. If the LRTA was stuck paying a bunch of local taxes, they might have to raise fares or, like, cut back on the train service.
Totally. It could affect everyone. And it goes beyond just transportation, too. Think about hospitals, schools, the mail system. Anything run by the government nationwide could be impacted.
This case really shows how connected all these government systems are, How even a legal fight that seems really specific can have these huge consequences everywhere.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about public-private partnerships, too.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
How do you see the LRTA case affecting those kinds of collaborations?
Well, if a private company is brought in to run something that a government instrumentality might normally handle, that private company would have to pay local taxes, right?
Right, so using a private company could end up costing local governments more money in the long run.
Exactly. And that might make them less likely to use private companies, even if those companies have, expertise or could do things more efficiently. After this LRTA case, local governments might be more worried about the costs.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Mm.
One Supreme Court decision could totally change how local governments think about providing services to people.
Totally. And it shows how important it is to have clear legal definitions, to be able to tell the difference between things. The Supreme Court really had to break down the difference between GOCCs and government instrumentalities to clear up this whole mess.
Yeah, it's like they had to untangle a knot, show everyone each little piece of string and how they all fit together. But even with this decision, I feel like there's still going to be these debates about, you know, how to give local governments the money they need while also protecting those really important services.
Oh, for sure. This isn't the end of the conversation. The LRTA case gives us a way to think about these issues, but it also raises all these new questions and challenges.
And that's what's so interesting about it, right? This isn't just some boring legal case. This gives us a look into how different levels of government work together, how public services get funded, and what role private companies play in all of that.
Totally. And for everyone listening, it shows how even the most technical legal stuff can have a huge impact on our daily lives. It's worth paying attention to and understanding how it might change things around us.
I agree. We've really dug into this Supreme Court decision and started to see all the ways it could affect things in the future. It's definitely a lot to process.
It is. It really shows how these legal issues, even when they seem specific, can have these wide-ranging consequences for how our society works. This case touches on so much. Transportation, education, healthcare, the whole idea of what government is.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive, and I hope everyone listening has a better grasp of this case and what it all means. What do you think is the most important thing to take away from all this?
I think the big takeaway is that government is complicated. Everything's connected. A court decision in one area can trigger a whole chain of events that affects tons of other areas. It's a good reminder to be aware, to pay attention to these things, and to be part of the conversation about how we want our society to work.
Absolutely. Well, that's our deep dive into the LRTA versus Quezon City case. We hope you found it interesting.
And if you did, don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more deep dives into all sorts of complex and fascinating topics that really matter.
Okay, but we've talked about public-private partnerships and like that balance between national and local governments, but I'm thinking about the everyday person.
Right.
What does all this mean for them? How could this case actually change their lives?
That's the big question, right? Something for everyone listening to think about. So practically speaking, if this LRTA case makes local governments more hesitant to use private companies for things like public services, we might see more of those services being run directly by government
Like
agencies.
some more government-run services instead of outsourcing to private companies.
Exactly, and that could be good or bad, On the one hand, government-run services are probably more accountable to the public, and they could be cheaper because they're not trying to make a profit.
Sounds good for people.
It could be. But some people say that government agencies can be slow, not as efficient or innovative as a private company might be. There's that worry that the quality of the service or how fast they deliver it could suffer.
So it's a trade-off, more accountability, and maybe lower costs, but maybe some downsides when it comes to how well it's done or how quickly.
Exactly. It's complicated. There's no easy answer. The LRTA case just adds another layer to this whole debate we've been having about the best way to handle public services.
It's like this one case, LRTA versus Quezon City, just blew open all these questions about how government services work and how we pay for them.
Yeah, it really did. And it shows that there's not one solution that works everywhere for everything. What's good in one city or for one service might not be the best somewhere else for a different service.
So this decision could have repercussions for years to come as local governments and national agencies and those private companies, they all figure out how to deal with this new way of looking at things.
Absolutely. The LRTA case sets a precedent that's going to influence decisions and policies down the line, that's for sure. It reminds us that legal battles, even when they seem super niche, can have a huge impact on our society and how things run.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job breaking down this case. We look at the legal arguments, what the Supreme Court said, and how this might affect things in the future. That's a lot.
It is, and it shows how something that seems like this technical legal matter can really change our daily lives.
Hmm.
This case is connected to transportation, education, healthcare, the whole idea of what government is, really.
It's been a great deep dive. I hope everyone listening learned a lot about this case and what it means. What do you think is the most important thing people should take away from all of this?
I think the big takeaway is this. The systems we have, the way our government works, it's complicated. Everything's connected. Like one court decision over here can set off a whole chain reaction that affects so many other things. It's a good reminder that we need to pay attention, be informed, and participate in the conversation about how we want our society to run.
I agree. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into LRTA versus Quezon City. Hope you enjoyed it.
And if you did, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into all sorts of complex and interesting topics, the kind of stuff that really matters. We'll see you next time.